You're probably wondering why I've spent the last 30 years studying the work of C.G. Jung. He sums it up in the conclusion of Answer to Job, paragraph 746. At the end of that paragraph, he says, referring to man, since he has been granted an almost godlike power, he can no longer remain blind and unconscious. He must know something of God's nature and of metaphysical processes if he is to understand himself and therefore achieve knowledge of the divine. Now, this paragraph begins as follows. The only thing that really matters now is whether man can climb up to a higher moral level, to a higher plane of consciousness, in order to be equal to the superhuman powers which the fallen angels have played into his hands. But he can make no progress with himself unless he becomes very much better acquainted with his own nature. Unfortunately, a terrifying ignorance prevails in this respect, and an equally great aversion to increasing the knowledge of his intrinsic character. We can, of course, hope for an undeserved grace of God, who hears our prayers, but God, who also does not hear our prayers, wants to become man, and for that purpose he has chosen the creaturely man filled with darkness, the natural man who is tainted with original sin, and who learnt the divine arts and sciences from the fallen angels. The guilty man is eminently suitable and is therefore chosen to become the vessel for the continuing incarnation. We now know again that God is not only to be loved, but also to be feared. He fills us with evil as well as with good. Otherwise, he would not need to be feared. And because he wants to become man, the uniting of his antinomy must take place in man. This involves man in a new responsibility. He can no longer wriggle out of it on the plea of his littleness or nothingness. For the dark God has slipped the atom bomb and chemical weapons into his hands and given him the power to empty out the apocalyptic vials of wrath on his fellow creatures. Since he has been granted an almost godlike power, he can no longer remain blind and unconscious.